The death of a mother-in-law seemed like the end of years of family tension, but when Marcus inherited her Victorian property in Salem, Massachusetts, he discovered that some secrets are darker than any nightmare. What began as a simple inheritance transformed into a terrifying investigation about occult rituals, mysterious deaths, and a cursed family lineage that Marcus never knew existed. Eleanor Whitmore had always been an enigma. For 15 years, she maintained a cold distance from her daughter Sarah and her son-in-law Marcus. Her Victorian house from 1692 stood like a fortress on Chestnut Street, its Gothic windows always dark, its gardens overgrown with herbs that filled the air with strange, almost intoxicating aromas. Neighbors whisper about the odd woman who lived alone, surrounded by cats and ancient books, who never participated in community events and seemed to age slower than humanly possible. When Eleanor died suddenly at age 78, the family expected to inherit debts and old furniture. What they discovered was a legacy that would challenge everything they believed about reality, family history, and the thin line that separates the living from the dead. This discovery would not only change Marcus's understanding of his deceased mother-in-law, but would put his own family in mortal danger. The inheritance documents were as mysterious as Eleanor herself. Written in elaborate calligraphy, they specified that the property could only be passed to the eldest male descendant, and that Marcus must take possession within 7 days of her death. Failure to comply would result in the property being donated to the Salem Historical Society, along with all its contents and secrets. The call came at 3 a.m. Sarah's trembling voice on the other end of the line delivered the news that Marcus had been secretly dreading and anticipating for years. Eleanor Whitmore was dead, found in her library surrounded by open books and burning candles, as if she had simply decided to stop existing in the middle of some ancient ritual. Marcus had met Eleanor only a handful of times during his 15-year marriage to Sarah. Each encounter left him with an unsettling feeling, as if the elderly woman could see directly into his soul and found something there that amused her in a disturbing way. Her piercing gray eyes seemed to hold centuries of knowledge, and her smile never reached those eyes that appeared to judge every word, every gesture, every breath. The funeral was attended by fewer than a dozen people. Eleanor had no friends, no close relatives besides Sarah, and the neighbors who came seemed more curious than mournful. The pastor who conducted the service admitted he had never met the deceased and had to rely on a brief biography that Sarah had hastily written the night before. 3 days after the burial, Marcus and Sarah received an envelope sealed with black wax. Inside, along with property deed, was a handwritten letter from Eleanor that made Marcus's blood run cold. Marcus, you are not who you think you are. The house will reveal your true heritage. Enter the basement when the moon is dark. What you find there belongs to you by right of blood. The responsibility passes to you now. Do not fail as others before you have failed. When they arrived at the house on Chestnut Street, Marcus felt as if he were stepping into another century. The Victorian structure towered 3 stories high, its dark with siding weathered by more than 3 centuries of New England winters. Gargoyles perched on the corners of the roof, their stone eyes seeming to track every movement in the street below. The interior was a museum of the macabre. Every room was filled with antique furniture covered in dust, oil paintings of stern-faced individuals whose eyes followed visitors through rooms, and shelves lined with leather-bound books written in languages Marcus couldn't identify. The air was heavy with the scent of old wood, dried herbs, and something else, something that reminded him of ancient graveyards after rain. Eleanor's personal library occupied the entire 2nd floor. Thousands of books on witchcraft, demonology, ancient rituals, and family genealogies lined the walls from floor to ceiling. Marcus found journals dating back decades, all written in Eleanor's meticulous handwriting, documenting dreams, visions, and what appeared to be communications with spirits. Sarah felt uncomfortable from the moment they entered the house. She complained of headaches, sudden temperature drops, and the constant sensation of being watched. More than once, she insisted she heard whispers coming from the walls, voices speaking in a language that sounded familiar yet incomprehensible. On their first night in the house, Marcus was awakened by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. When he investigated, he found nothing, but noticed that several books in the library had been moved and opened to specific pages. All dealt with family lineages and blood inheritance rituals. It was then that Marcus began to suspect that Eleanor's death was not as natural as appeared, and that his inheritance came with responsibilities he was only beginning to understand. The basement door had always been locked, and Eleanor had never mentioned its existence. Marcus found the key hanging on a chain around Eleanor's neck when they prepared her body for burial, a detail that the funeral director had forgotten to mention until Marcus specifically asked about personal belongings. The key was made of black iron, ornately carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. When Marcus held it, the metal felt warm against the skin, as if it had been recently heated over a flame. The basement door was hidden behind a massive bookshelf in the library. It took Marcus 20 minutes to figure out the mechanism that moved the shelf, which seemed to respond to pressure applied to specific books in a predetermined sequence. When the shelf finally swung aside, it revealed a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron bands and covered in the same strange symbols that decorated the key. The moment Marcus opened the door, a wave of cold air rushed up from the darkness below, carried with it the unmistakable smell of death and something else. Incense, maybe, or herbs that had been burned in quantities large enough to leave a permanent mark on the air itself. The stone steps were worn smooth by centuries of foot traffic. As Marcus descended with a flashlight, he could see that the walls were carved from the same stone used in Salem's oldest buildings. Moisture dripped constantly from the ceiling, creating small pools on the floor that reflected his flashlight beam like dark mirrors. What he found at the bottom of the stairs defied all rational explanation. 12 wooden coffins arranged in a perfect circle, each elevated on a stone platform carved with intricate symbols. The coffins were clearly ancient. They were darkened by age and what appeared to be centuries of ritual use. Each one was marked with a brass plate bearing a name, a date of birth, and a date of death. The dates spanned more than 3 centuries, from 1692 to 1978. The names were all connected. Marcus could see the family relationships carved into the brass plates. Ezekiel Whitmore, 1645 to 1692. Prudence Whitmore, 1670 to 1701. Obadiah Whitmore, 1695 to 1734. The pattern continued through the centuries, each death occurring exactly 31 years after the previous one. In the center of the circle, directly beneath what appeared to be a skylight sealed with black glass, stood an altar made of the same stone as the platforms. On its surface lay an open book bound in leather so old it appeared to be cracking. Its pages filled with handwriting in multiple languages and what looked like dried blood. Marcus approached one of the coffins, the one marked with the most recent date, 1978, bearing the name Thomas Whitmore. When he lifted the heavy lid, his flashlight revealed not just bones, but preserved clothing, jewelry, and a journal wrapped in oilcloth. The body had been mummified using techniques that preserved not just the skeleton, but enough tissue to see facial features that looked remarkably similar to his own. As Marcus stood there, trying to process what he was seeing, he heard the sound of the basement door closing above him. When he reached the top of the stairs and tried to open it, he discovered that it had locked itself. The keyhole was on the outside, and no amount of pushing or pry would budge the door. Panic began to set in as Marcus realized he was trapped in a basement full of his dead relatives, with no way to communicate with the outside world and no idea how long the battery in his flashlight would last. It was then that he noticed something else. The sealed skylight above the altar was beginning to glow with a faint, otherworldly light. What do you think about what you've seen so far? Do you believe Marcus is truly trapped by supernatural forces, or is there a more rational explanation for what's happening? What would you do if you found yourself in a similar situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Marcus's imprisonment in the basement lasted 6 hours, though it felt like days. During that time, he methodically examined each coffin and discovered that his family tree was far more extensive and sinister than he had ever imagined. Each deceased family member had left behind detailed journals documenting their part in what appeared to be a centuries-long ritual designed to contain something that they referred to only as the Hungry One. The escape came when Sarah, worried by Marcus's absence, called the local police. When they broke down the basement door, they found Marcus unconscious beside the altar, the ancient book open to a page written entirely in what appeared to be his own handwriting, though he had no memory of writing anything. Upon returning home, Marcus became obsessed with Eleanor's diaries. He spent days reading through decades of meticulous records that revealed a truth more shocking than anything he could have imagined. His family was directly connected to the founding families of Salem, specifically to those accused of witchcraft during the infamous trials of 1692. Eleanor's records showed that the Whitmore family had been practicing what she called protective magic for more than 3 centuries. They weren't devil worshippers or evil witches, but guardians tasked with keeping something far more dangerous contained. The 12 coffins in the basement contained the remains of family members who had each died as part of a ritual sacrifice designed to strengthen the magical barriers holding the Hungry One in check. Each entry in Eleanor's diary revealed more disturbing details. The entity they guarded had been trapped during the Salem witch trials by a coven of real witches who sacrificed themselves to create the initial containment. The Whitmore family had been chosen as guardians because of their unique bloodline, a combination of Native American shamanic power and European magical knowledge that made them particularly effective at maintaining the barriers between worlds. Eleanor hadn't been an eccentric old woman collecting occult books for entertainment. She had been the most recent guardian in an unbroken line of magical protectors, and every decision she made, every spell she cast, every ritual she performed had been designed to keep something unimaginably evil from breaking free into the world. The diary entries from her final months revealed the truth about Marcus's inheritance. He wasn't Sarah's husband by coincidence. Eleanor had manipulated events to ensure that Sarah would meet and marry a man with the right bloodline to continue the family tradition. Marcus's own family history, which he had always believed to be unremarkable, included ancestors who had been accused of witchcraft in other parts of New England. More disturbing still were Eleanor's observations about the containment spell weakening over time. Each generation, it became harder to maintain the barriers. The sacrificial deaths that had once occurred every 50 years now needed to happen every 31 years. And even that wasn't enough. Eleanor's final entry spoke of dreams in which the Hungry One spoke to her directly, promising power, wealth, and immortality in exchange for freedom. The most chilling discovery came when Marcus found Eleanor's medical records hidden in a secret compartment of her desk. She hadn't died of natural causes. The autopsy report, which had been somehow suppressed, showed evidence of ritual poisoning. She had taken a combination of herbs that would cause heart failure while simultaneously performing a spell that transferred her guardian responsibilities to the next blood heir. That night, Sarah began having nightmares that felt more real than dreams. She described walking to the basement and seeing all 12 coffins open, their occupants sitting up and speaking in unison about a responsibility that could not be escaped. She woke with marks on her arms that looked like handprints, though Marcus had been sleeping beside her all night. Marcus realized that Eleanor's death hadn't ended anything. It had begun the final phase of a ritual that would either strengthen the containment forever or destroy it completely. And he was running out of time to figure out which outcome Eleanor had been working toward. We want to thank you immensely for staying with this video until here. We truly appreciate your time and interest in this story. We assure you that the best is yet to come, and what you'll discover in the next chapters will surprise you completely. The investigation into Eleanor's true nature led Marcus to discoveries that challenged everything he thought he knew about reality, family, and the responsibilities that come with blood inheritance. Hidden in Eleanor's bedroom, behind a false panel that required solving a puzzle involving astrological symbols, Marcus found evidence that his mother-in-law had been living far longer than any human should. Photographs dating back to the 1920s showed Eleanor looking exactly as she did in recent years. Birth certificates, death certificates, and marriage licenses revealed a pattern of identity changes every 30 to 40 years, each time moving to a new location and assuming a new identity while maintaining the same appearance and the same mission. Eleanor Whitmore, it turned out, was actually Eleanor Sinclair, who had previously been Eleanor Morrison, and before that, Eleanor Blackwood. Each identity corresponded to a different phase of the containment ritual, and each had been carefully chosen to place her in the right location at the right time to maintain the magical barriers that kept the Hungry One imprisoned. The most shocking discovery came in a series of letters Eleanor had written but never sent. Letters addressed to Marcus, written years before he had even met Sarah. In them, she described watching him from a distance, ensuring that he received the right education, lived in the right places, and met the right people to prepare him for his eventual role as her successor. "You have been shaped for this purpose your entire life," one letter read. "Every job you've taken, every place you've lived, every person you met has been part of a carefully orchestrated plan to prepare you for what you must do. I am sorry for the deception, but the alternative is too terrible to contemplate." Marcus's marriage to Sarah hadn't been a coincidence of love and attraction. Eleanor had used subtle magical influences to ensure they would meet at a coffee shop in Boston on a specific date when the astrological conditions were perfect for binding their fates together. She had even influenced Sarah's career choices to ensure the couple would eventually move close enough to Salem for Marcus to take over the guardian role when needed. More disturbing were Eleanor's notes about Sarah's role in the grand plan. Sarah wasn't just an innocent bystander. She was a descendant of Rebecca Nurse, one of the women executed during the Salem witch trials. Her bloodline carried the genetic memory of the original containment spell, making her the perfect vessel for channeling the power needed to maintain or strengthen the barriers. Sarah's recent nightmares weren't random supernatural events. They were her ancestral memories awakening as the Hungry One grew stronger and more desperate. The entity was trying to possess her, to use her connection to the original spell to break free from its centuries-long imprisonment. Eleanor's medical journals revealed that she had been using a combination of herbs and magical rituals to extend her own life well beyond human limits, but the process came with a terrible cost. Each year of extended life required the sacrifice of another year from someone else's lifespan. The people in the photographs that disappeared from Eleanor's albums weren't friends who had moved away. They were individuals whose life force Eleanor had consumed to maintain her guardianship for more than a century. The final entry in Eleanor's diary, written on the day of her death, revealed her ultimate sacrifice. "The barriers weaken, and I no longer have the strength to maintain them alone. Marcus must choose between two paths. He can complete the ritual as our family has done for centuries, sacrificing Sarah to strengthen the containment and condemning our bloodline to another generation of guardianship. Or he can break the cycle by sacrificing himself, freeing our family from this burden, but risking the possibility that the Hungry One will eventually find another way to escape. I have given him 7 days to make this choice. May God forgive me for what I have done to these children, and may they have the wisdom to choose more wisely than I did." That same night, Marcus woke to find Sarah standing in their bedroom, her eyes rolled back to show only whites, speaking in a voice that didn't belong to her. The voice spoke a hunger that had grown for 3 centuries, of power that could reshape reality, and of a bargain that could give Marcus everything he had ever wanted in exchange for one simple act of betrayal. When Sarah returned to normal the next morning, she had no memory of the conversation, but Marcus could see something different in her eyes. Something that watched him with an intelligence far older and more malevolent than his wife possessed. Marcus discovered he had exactly 7 days from Eleanor's death to complete the ritual she had started, or risk the Hungry One breaking free to terrorize not just his family, but potentially the entire world. The entity that his family had kept contained for more than 3 centuries was growing stronger with each passing hour, and the signs of its awakening were becoming impossible to ignore. The temperature in the house dropped 20 degrees overnight, despite the heating system working perfectly. Ice formed on the windows in patterns that looked like reaching hands and screaming faces. Sarah's possessions began occurring more frequently and lasting longer, with the entity using her voice to whisper secrets about Marcus's deepest fears and most shameful thoughts. Through Eleanor's research, Marcus learned that the Hungry One was not a demon in the traditional sense, but something far older and more dangerous, a primordial entity that existed before human civilization, feeding on fear, despair, and the life force of living beings. It had been awakened during the Salem witch trials by practitioners who had underestimated its power and barely managed to contain it through the sacrifice of their entire coven. The containment had held for 3 centuries, but each generation had been forced to make increasingly desperate sacrifices to maintain it. The 12 family members buried in the basement had each died voluntarily, understanding that their deaths would strengthen the magical barriers for another 31 years. But the math was becoming impossible. The entity grew stronger with each passing decade, while the human guardians grew fewer and weaker. Eleanor's final notes revealed the true horror of Marcus's situation. The traditional ritual required the sacrifice of the guardian's most beloved person, with their death occurring at the moment of deepest love and trust. For Marcus, this meant he would need to kill Sarah with his own hands, using a ceremonial knife that Eleanor had left in the basement, while she looked at him with love and trust in her eyes. The alternative was even more terrifying. If Marcus chose to break the cycle by refusing to perform the ritual, the hungry one would eventually break free on its own. But instead of being contained again, it would have access to all the stored power from 3 centuries of containment rituals, power that would make it nearly impossible to stop. As the 7-day deadline approached, the supernatural manifestations intensified. Neighbors began reporting strange dreams about the house on Chestnut Street. Electronics throughout Salem malfunctioned when their users came within a mile of the property. Animals fled the area, and several people reported seeing shadowy figures walking through the streets at night, always moving toward Eleanor's house. Sarah's possessions became more frequent and more violent. During one episode, she spoke in Eleanor's voice, begging Marcus to understand that she had tried to find another way for decades, but had finally accepted that some burdens cannot be lifted, only passed on. During another possession, she spoke in the voice of the hungry one itself, promising Marcus power over life and death, eternal youth, and the ability to reshape reality according to his desires, all in exchange for simply walking away and allowing the entity to finally feed after centuries of starvation. On the 6th day, Marcus made his decision, unable to bring himself to kill Sarah, but equally unable to risk unleashing an ancient evil upon the world. He chose a third option that Eleanor had never considered. Using his wife's ancestral connection to the original containment spell, he would attempt to redirect the ritual's power to permanently destroy the hungry one rather than simply containing it for another generation. The ritual required Marcus to enter the basement at midnight on the 7th day, bringing Sarah with him while she was possessed by the entity. At the moment when the hungry one was fully manifested through her body, Marcus would use Eleanor's ceremonial knife not to kill Sarah, but to cut his own throat, while channeling all his love for his wife into a spell designed to turn the entity's own accumulated power against itself. It was a plan with no guarantee of success and a certainty of death for Marcus, but offered the possibility of freeing future generations from the burden his family had carried for 3 centuries, even if it meant Sarah would have to live with the memory of watching her husband die to save her and the world. As midnight approached on the 7th day, Marcus descended into the basement one final time, carrying Sarah's unconscious body, and knowing that in the next hour, either he would be dead and his family would finally be free, or the hungry one would be loose in the world and everything he had ever loved would be consumed by an ancient hunger that had been growing stronger for more than 300 years. The choice between perpetuating a cycle of evil or risking the end of everything had finally been made, and Marcus could only hope that love would prove stronger than the darkness that had haunted his bloodline for centuries. What would you do if you discovered that your family carries such a dark secret across generations? Would you be capable of perpetuating a terrible tradition to protect those you love? This story reminds us that some inheritances come with a price that goes beyond what we can imagine, and that family secrets can be more powerful and dangerous than any supernatural evil. The thin line between protecting the world and perpetuating darkness is sometimes impossible to see until you're forced to walk it yourself. Marcus's choice represents the ultimate test of character, the willingness to sacrifice everything, including your own life, for the possibility that future generations might be free from the burdens of the past. If you were intrigued by this terrifying discovery, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications for more stories that challenge the limits between reality and the supernatural. Your support helps us continue sharing these experiences that remind us how complex and mysterious life can be. And don't miss our next video. The woman who inherited her grandmother's mirror and discovered she wasn't alone. An even more disturbing story that will question everything you believe about reflections and reality. Click on the screen to watch it now.